Okay, this is an episode of the Super Honest Economist. I've had a lot of questions from both teachers and students for me to talk about what's happening between Israel and Hamas. So it is an extraordinarily complex thing that's happening, being dumbed down by the media. So I'm a really good artist, better than most of you. So I'm going to draw these things for you. So here is Israel. Nope. Here's Israel, all right? There's Israel, okay? And then you've got the West Bank here, and you've got Gaza right here, okay? For a long time, the West Bank and Gaza were controlled by an organization called the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, previously under Yasser Arafat, now under a guy named Mahmoud Abbas, okay? This area was once just all called Palestine, and then after World War I, it started becoming more organized. After World War II, a Jewish home state was made in 1948 that declared their independence. There was a war. There's been several wars. After that was called the Six-Day War in 1967. This area of Palestine has become increasingly under Israeli control, okay? There's been a bunch of wars or fatwas between the Palestinians and the Israelis. One big issue is that Israel is right here. Israel was originally an international city, and then after the war, this became an Israeli-only city. About 15 years ago, 12 years, I can't remember the actual date, we started to see a big difference in between Gaza and the West Bank. The Israelis, for a long time, have been putting what we call settlements. They call them settlements. They're really just cities into the West Bank, pushing into their occupancy in their area. These people in Gaza and the West Bank, they don't really have a lot of human rights in the sense that they can't like go many places. There's not a free speech. They have very limited job opportunities. So these people and their families have been stuck here in the Palestinian area for a long time. Now, they've gotten support from other Arab countries, but only support enough to make it seem like they care about them, but not quite enough support to actually make their lives better or allow Palestinians to come into areas like Jordan up here or Saudi Arabia, okay? So about 12 or 13 years ago, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, but there is considered a little bit more like a civic organization. I would kind of like, this isn't a great comparison, but on some level I would compare it to like the IRA in Ireland, in the 70s and 80s, was a political front called Sinn Féin. So they basically took over this area of Gaza. It's a very, very small area. This is a small area in general. And Hamas was actually kind of took control of Gaza less because of like ideological reasons and more because the PLO just wasn't very good at running the area, and Hamas brought a little bit less corruption, brought a little bit more stability to the area, and so people kind of went with Hamas. Now Hamas, it's Hamas. Hamas is backed by several different organizations, one of which is Iran, right? So then we've got Iran over here, all right? Iran and Saudi Arabia have not liked each other for a long time. Saudi Arabia has Mecca and Medina, which are the two biggest parts of the two holiest sites of the Islamic world, but also there's some really important areas in Jerusalem and in Israel proper. Saudi Arabia and Iran have not liked each other. They're Sunni, they're Shia. The Palestinians are mostly Sunni. Recently, the Saudi Arabians and the Iranians have become a little bit closer and closer in this pact, and the Biden administration is working on Israel and Saudi Arabia having a relationship that is more formal than they've ever had, okay? So this is all an important thing to remember. Now, Hamas, which again is backed by part Iran, also up here, here is Lebanon, right? Lebanon has a large portion of it controlled by an organization called Hezbollah. Hezbollah is also backed by the Iranians, okay? So a couple days ago, there was a horrible, very bloody incursion from Gaza into Israel, and they had people who were already planted there. They had people on like gliders that they brought in and started firing at people. It's been brutal. And as of today, which is Wednesday the 11th, there's been almost 12 or 1,300 people killed. There has been a retaliation into Gaza, and over 1,000 people in Gaza have been killed. Much of Gaza's water, power, electricity is controlled from Israel. That's been turned off. The Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, has called up 300,000 reservists. And so that's where we kind of are now. This attack by Hamas has been particularly brutal, going after indiscriminately women, children, wherever. And so it's seen as an act of terror, which it is. Now, to back up a little bit, the PLO, particularly in this area, has been sort of punished for a long time by the Israelis, and they haven't gotten a lot of their own authority to make a state, to make two states. There are several different ideas on how we can fix this. There's one called the two-state solution, where Palestine and Israel are just two separate states, and that has been proposed a long time. In 1999 and early 2000, it looked like there was a real chance in August of 1999 when the Israeli Prime Minister Ahu Barat and Bill Clinton were really close to getting this deal done with Yasser Arafat. He pulled back at the end, and then a couple years later we had another round of fighting. What we're seeing in Israel now is we have an ultra right-wing prime minister named Benjamin Netanyahu, whose nickname is Bibi. Bibi Netanyahu has been the longest-serving Israeli prime minister, on and off for a long time. He's extraordinarily conservative and has really kind of picked on the West Bank and not focused as much on Gaza. We're going to get to this in a second. But the pressure that's been put on Israel onto the Palestinians, many have said that maybe this was a reaction to that. But here's the thing, all right? There's a lot going on here. And none of this am I excusing or saying anything about the killings. This clearly was a coordinated attack. Now, a lot of other things are going on here with a lot of other actors we got to consider. Number one, just last week, you actually had an Israeli government official, cabinet member, go to Saudi Arabia, and there were pictures of him in Riyadh praying from the Torah, and it was released. People in Israel loved it. People in Palestine didn't, and they saw it as a real punch, right? You've got a Jewish person praying from a Torah scroll with the picture of Riyadh in the background. And then you have this relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran that is tenuous, and so you've got that going on. What you also have going on is internal Israeli politics, where they had a divided government. They couldn't agree on which government to have, and the far right, and along with Netanyahu, are trying to rewrite the Constitution to take power away from the judicial branch, giving an insane amount of power to the executive branch, particularly owned or controlled by conservatives. And now that this is happening, this is rallying everyone together, which is sort of rallying conservatives to their side. Usually when there's an attack, countries sort of rally around the leader, and the idea of retaliation becomes a little bit more politically influenced. So there's that, okay, all of that. You also have to throw America into this, okay? Israel gets a lot of its weapons from America, and in America, you have obviously two parties. You have the Democrats and you have the Republicans. The Republicans support Israel probably more openly than the Democrats do for a bunch of reasons. One is that this is an issue of religiosity, okay? Our support for Israel is more about domestic American politics than foreign politics, because in the end, your average conservative, to be fair, doesn't give a fuck about who's doing whatever in this area, okay? The reality is you have people who are congressmen who are getting campaign donations from internal groups in America, some of them Jewish, other of them are Christian evangelical. There's a lot of crazy-ass, ultra-right-wing evangelicals who want the Israelis to have total control of this area because it's foretold in the Old Testament that the coming of Jesus will happen once this is actually come to fruition. And I didn't believe that when I first heard it 10 years ago. The more reading I do, this is an actual thing. And Republicans have a lot of backing up from ultra-conservative evangelicals. In fact, it's their biggest base. And I don't know this, but I guarantee you over the next couple weeks, you'll see Fox News and Newsmax jumping over each other to who can suck Israel's dick fastest, because they all want to seem like they're the most pro-Israel. You're going to have some moderate Democrats who are also going to say some of the same stuff, because we have always backed up the Israelis, including Biden, who's a centrist, and he's going to try to back up the Israelis. He and Netanyahu have known each other for a long time, okay? So this is something inside America. But here's the next thing. Hamas has done this with such ferocity, it looks like what they want is Israel to have an enormous reaction militarily and basically start wiping out Gaza. These people who are attacking, these are people who don't give a shit about their own lives. This is about politics. This attack was about something larger, and all these people who are getting in the way of it are casualties from a larger political motive that Hamas has that we don't know enough about yet. Who are they getting their money from? Probably Iran. But who are some of Iran's BFFs? Well, one of them up here is a fucking country called Russia. And what Russia and Putin know is, if we focus our ire on Israel trying to fight Hamas, who are we going to give less money to? We're going to give less money to Ukraine, and especially these right-wing Republicans who don't like the fighting in Ukraine. You can see that a lot of ultra-right-wing Republicans, particularly in the House, not so much in the Senate, but particularly in the House, are trying to cut off our deal with sending money to Ukraine. In fact, you saw this with the 45-day budget resolution that McCarthy had before he got kicked out. Right now, the Republicans can't get their shit together. There's no Speaker of the House. But once they do, you'll start seeing, probably next week, a fuck ton of, oh my God, I love Israel. No, I love Israel even more. Well, I want to make Israel's babies. Well, I want to have their babies even more. You're going to see a whole lot of that shit on Fox News, on CNN, and on all those morning shows talking about how much they love Israel. What that's doing is taking our focus away from Ukraine, which is exactly what Russia wants. You have to think, who is benefiting from this? The other group that's benefiting from this from a political perspective is going to be China, all right? Because while China gets most of the great majority of their oil from Saudi Arabia, we get basically no oil from the Middle East. In fact, at this point, America produces more oil than Saudi Arabia does because of fracking. So we don't give a shit about their oil right now, right? This becomes more political and a human rights issue. But if it was really about human rights issues and people were dying, then we would have given a fuck about the Uyghurs in China or the Rohingya in Southeast Asia. If we really give a fuck about these people, we'd be raising storms all over the place. But we really only care when it's politically viable for people inside the country, right? And that's not my opinion. You can not believe me if you want to write, but you're welcome to do your own investigation. Now with China, who is China like? Well, China knows that America is BFFs with Taiwan, and we're protecting Taiwan. So if we're busy protecting Taiwan and Ukraine and Israel, does America have the capacity to do all three of those things at the same time? China's betting on no. Now China's fucked because this is probably, I don't know this for a fact, probably going to cause a little bit of market volatility in the oil markets, which will have a spillover effect. China's economy right now is in the shit, and any kind of increase in prices is going to even drive their economy in worse shape. Their debt is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. The real estate market in China is having a hard time. But what can always work, particularly if you have a state media controlled dictatorship, is confrontations. China claims it's friends with both the Palestinians and the Israelis. China has done a pretty good job, or you might say morally ambiguous job, allowing dictatorships and horrible actors around the world to do what they do, not question human rights, because we don't want to have them get their human rights questioned too. But what you need to be watching about is, how is this affecting our funding of Ukraine? How is this affecting our ability to patrol the Pacific, and especially around Taiwan, and make sure that China is not pushing into a space they normally wouldn't have pushed into. Is our Congress going to put enough money to protect Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan, or are we going to have political turmoil inside America where the right wing of the Republican Party starts making demands that we send all of our focus here and we forget about Ukraine? So then you have to ask the question, who's benefiting the most? Well, in this case, if Russia is benefiting the most, then you have to wonder, and I have no evidence of this, but you have to start wondering, the people who are benefiting the most, are they the ones who are helping Hamas do that? If I was part of the Russian intelligence apparatus, this is one of the things that I would have done, right? Is try to create an environment in which we can divide American politics again. They've already done that in the 2016 election, and now this is another way to do it, to drive a wedge between Republicans and Democrats to get their head turned one way so they can lose focus on our Ukrainian mission, which is super important to the upholding of democracy in Europe. And so if we let this domino fall, or this domino, it's a really big deal. So Hamas and Israel isn't just about Hamas and Israel. It has much larger implications, and we need to see, what is Israel's response to Gaza going to be? Will they destroy the whole place, invade, and go overboard, which is going to cause a political outrage all over the world? And then America is going to have to start cleaning up our relationships around the world. What's going to happen inside American domestic politics? We have one American Congresswoman, Tlaib, who is Palestinian, who right now I think is refusing to criticize a Palestinian response. That sounds really, really familiar to the refusal of a lot of Irish people to go against or criticize Sinn Féin or the IRA in the 1970s and 80s. It becomes on some level very tribal, and a lot of this is tribal. But Hamas has clearly made a political decision that this amount of insane terroristic violence, they're trying to elicit a response from Israel, and we need to see what Israel's response is going to be and how Biden is going to be able to play this with Netanyahu and with Zelensky and with our Taiwanese allies. So here's what's going on. Sorry if my drawings were not to scale, but this is a breakdown of this. It's not just about this. Never is an invasion by a terrorist organization just about this. There's always a larger political goal with a backing from someone else. And now if you're Israel, you also have to think, one more thing, will Hezbollah come in and get involved? Because if Hezbollah comes in and gets involved, that's a whole nother thing. What's Saudi Arabia going to do? They're going to drive a wedge between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that now Biden's administration, which has been working really hard to get Israel and Saudi Arabia together, how's that going to play out? So what this does is it crumbles an area of the world that was starting to come together a little bit. One thing that we saw in 2018, 2019, right, you've got the country of Syria up here, with the Syrian civil war and a lot of stuff happening. When Trump was in there, he basically ceded, and you don't have to believe me, but I'm right, he basically ceded a lot of our influence in the Middle East to Russia. And Russia was able to gain a lot more influence in the Middle East than it ever had before as America pulled back. He even in the Abraham Accords made Israeli peace with a couple small countries in the Middle East, and that was seen as a sign of them able to step back. But as America has kind of gone away from our previous sort of more aggressive tone in the Middle East, making sure that we have a presence there, like a sphere of influence sort of type of thing. As we've pushed back, that vacuum has allowed Russia to come in and play a much bigger role. It wouldn't surprise me if Russia was giving money to Iran, who was funding Hamas. I have no evidence of that, although if I had to guess, that's probably where Hamas is getting its money on some level. Probably from Iran, who probably got something from Russia or coordinated it with Russia. This was obviously a coordinated attack, and one that took time. So this is what's going on. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. I guess I'm supposed to say like and subscribe. I don't make a lot of YouTube videos, but there's a notification bell. Hit the notification bell. I don't know what that is, but you do that. And if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, Godspeed, and Zoe can turn off.